Repeat, staying with the mystical. Gotta repeat, staying with the mystical during these book readings here, since it's in the horror realm of the book readings. Um, I don't think I have actually done a book reading that wasn't horror related, but anyway. Um, Now on to part 4. JakeJohnstone19.com. JakeJohnstone19.com. We're now on to part 4 of the Institute reading. The end of the Institute. Hell is waiting. Yes, Kalisha thought, the headaches get better after the movies, but only for a little while, a shorter little while each time. Another fun night at the movies, George muttered. All right, children, what have we learned? Nicky asked. That somebody somewhere don't much care for the Reverend Paul Weston of Deerfield, Indiana. So Alicia zipped a thumb up across her lips and looked at the ceiling. Bugs, she thought at Nicky. Be careful. Nick put a gun to his head and pretended to shoot himself. It made the others smile. It would be different tomorrow, Alicia knew. No smiles then. After tomorrow's show, Dr. Hendricks would appear with his sparkler lit and the hum would rise to a white noise roar. Levers would be pulled. There would be a period of unknown length, both sublime and horrible, when their headaches would be banished completely. Instead of a clear 15 or 20 minutes afterward, there might be 6 or 8 hours of blessed relief, and sometimes, and somewhere, Paul Weston of Deerfield, Indiana would do something that would change his life or end it. For the kids in back half, life would go on, if you could call it living. The headaches will come back, and worse, worse each time, until instead of just feeling the hum, they would become part of it. Just another one of the gorks. That was Avery. No one else could project with such clean strength. It was as if he were living inside her head. That's how it works. Sha, because they see it, Felicia whispered, and there it was, bingo, the missing piece. She put the heels of her hands against her forehead, not because the headache was back, but because it was so beautifully obvious. She grasped Avery's small, bony shoulder. The Gorks see what we see. Why else would they keep them? Nicky put his arm around Kalisha and whispered in her ear. The touch of his lips made her shiver. What are you talking about? Their minds are gone, like ours will be, before long. Avery, that's what makes them stronger. Everything else is gone, stripped away. They're the battery. All we are is the switch, Kalisha whispered. The ignition switch. Avery nodded. We need to use them. When? Helen Sim's mental voice was that of a small, frightened child. It has to be soon, because I can't take much more of this. None of us can, George said. Besides, right now that bitch. Kalisha gave her head a warning shake, and George continued mentally. He wasn't very good at it, at least not yet, but Kalisha got the gist. They all did. Right now that bitch, Mrs. Sigsby, would be concentrating on Luke. Stackhouse too. Everyone in the institute would be, because they all knew he'd escaped. That was their chance. While everyone was scared and distracted, they would never get another one so good. Nicky began to smile. No time like the present. How? Iris asked. How can we do it? Avery. I think I know. But we need Hal and Donna and Len. Are you sure? Felicia asked, then added, they're almost gone. I'll get them, Nicky said. He got up. He was smiling. The Avister is right. Every little bit helps. His mental voice was stronger, Felicia realized. Was that on the sending or receiving end? Both, Avery said. He was smiling too, because now we're doing it for ourselves. Yes, Felicia thought, because they were doing it for themselves. They didn't have to be a bunch of dazed dummies sitting on the ventriloquist knee. It was so simple, but it was a revelation. What you did for yourself was what gave you the power. And now we are on chapter 14 of The End of the Institute. Hell is Waiting by Stephen King. Around the time Avery, dripping wet and shivering, was being pushed through the access tunnel between front half and back half, the Institute's Challenger aircraft 940 NF on the tail and Maine Paper Industries on the fuselage, was lifting off from Erie, Pennsylvania, now with its full assault team on board. As the plane reached cruising altitude and set out for the small town of Alcaloo, Tim Jameson and Wendy Gullickson were escorting Luke Ellis into the Fairleigh County Sheriff's Department. Many wheels moving in the same machine. This is Luke Ellis, Tim said. Luke, meet Deputies Faraday and Wicklow. Pleased to meet you, Luke said without much enthusiasm. Bill Wicklow was studying Luke's bruised face and bandaged ear. How's the other guy look? It's a long story, Wendy said before Luke could reply. Where's Sheriff John? In Dunning, Bill said. His mother's in the old folks' home there. She's got the. He tapped one temple. Said he'd be back around 5 unless she was having a good day, then he might stay and eat dinner with her. He looked at Luke. A beat-up boy in dirty clothes and might as well have been wearing a sign reading Runaway. Is this an emergency? A good question, Tim said. Tag, did you get that info Wendy requested? I did. The one named Faraday said, if you want to step into Sheriff John's office, I can give it to you. That won't be necessary. Tim said, I don't think you're going to tell me anything Luke doesn't already know. You sure? Tim glanced at Wendy, who nodded, then at Luke, who shrugged. Yes. Okay, this boy's parents, Herbert and Eileen Ellis, were murdered in their home about 7 weeks ago, shot to death in their bedroom. Luke felt as if he were having an out-of-body experience. The dots didn't come back, but this was the way he felt when they did. He took 2 steps to the swivel chair in front of the dispatch desk and collapsed onto it. It rolled backward, and would have tipped him over if it hadn't banged onto the wall first. Okay, Luke, Wendy asked. No. Yes, as much as I can be. The assholes in the Institute, Dr. Hendricks and Mrs. Sigsbee, and the caretakers, told me they were okay, just fine, but I knew they were dead even before I saw it on my computer. I knew it, but still awful. You had a computer in that place? Wendy asked. Yes, to play games with mostly, or look at YouTube music videos. Non-substantive stuff like that. News sites were supposed to be blocked, but I knew a workaround. They should have been monitoring my searches and caught me, but they were just lazy, complacent. I wouldn't have gotten out otherwise. What the hell's he talking about? Deputy Wicklow asked. Tim shook his head. He was still focused on Tag. You didn't get this from the Minneapolis police, right? No, but not because you told me not to. Sheriff John will decide who to contact and when. That's the way it works here. Meanwhile, though, Google had plenty. He gave Luke a you might be poisoned stare. He's listed in the database of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and there exploited children, and there are also bucol stories about him in the Minneapolis Star Tribune and the St. Paul Pioneer Press. According to the papers, he's supposed to be brilliant, a child prodigy. Sounds that way to me, Bill said. Uses a lot of big words. I'm right here, Luke thought. Talk about me like I'm here. The police aren't calling him a person of interest, Tag said. At least not in the newspaper stories, but they sure do want to question him. Luke spoke up. You bet they do, and the first question they ask will probably be, where'd you get the gun, kid? Did you kill them? Bill asked the question carefully, casually, as if just passing the time. Tell the truth now, son. It'll do you a world of good. No, I love my parents. The people who killed them were thieves, and I was what they came to steal. They didn't want me because I scored 1580 on the SATs, or because I can do complex equations in my head, or because I know that Hart Crane committed suicide by jumping off a boat in the Gulf of Mexico. They killed my mom and dad and kidnapped me because I sometimes could blow out a candle just by looking at it, or flip a pizza pan off the table at Rocket Pizza. An empty pizza pan, a full one would have stayed right where it was. He glanced at Tim and Wendy and laughed. I couldn't even get a job in a lousy roadside carnival. I don't see anything funny about any of this, Tag said, frowning. Neither do I, Luke said, but sometimes I laugh anyway. I laughed a lot with my friends Felicia and Nick in spite of everything we were going through. Besides, it's been a long summer. He didn't laugh this time, but he smiled. You have no idea. I'm thinking you could use some rest, Tim said. Tag, have you got anybody in the cells? Nope. Okay, why don't we... Luke took a step backward, alarm on his face. No way. No way. Tim held up his hands. Nobody's going to lock you up. We'd leave the door wide open. No, please don't do that. Please don't make me go in a cell. Alarm had become terror, and for the first time Tim began to believe at least one part of the boy's story. The psychic stuff was bullshit, but he had seen before what he was seeing now. While on the cops, the look and behavior of a child who has been abused. Okay, how about the couch in the waiting area? Wendy pointed. It's lumpy, but not too bad. I've stretched out on it a few times. If she had, Tim had never seen her do it, but the kid was clearly relieved. Okay, I'll do that, Mr. Jameson. Tim, you still have the flash drive, right? Tim took it out of his breast pocket and held it up. Right here. Good. He trudged to the couch. I wish you'd check on that, Mr. Hollister. I really think he might be an uncle. Tag and Bill gave Tim identical looks of puzzlement. Tim shook his head. Guys who watch for me, Luke said. They pretend to be my uncle, or maybe a cousin, or just a friend of the family. He caught Tag and Bill rolling their eyes at each other and smiled again. It was both tired and sweet. Yeah, I know how it sounds. Wendy, why don't you take these officers into Sheriff John's office and bring them up to speed on what Luke told us? I'll stay here. That's right, you will, Tag said, because until Sheriff John gives you a badge, you're just the town night knocker. Duly noted, Tim said. What's on the drive? Bill said. I don't know. When the sheriff gets here, we'll all look at it together. Wendy escorted the two deputies into Sheriff Ashworth's office and closed the door. Tim heard the murmur of voices. This was his usual time to sleep, but he felt more fully awake than he had in a long time since leaving the Sarasota PD. Maybe. He wanted to know who the boy beneath the nutty story really was, and where he had been, and what had happened to him. He got a cup of coffee from the bun in the corner. It was strong, but not undrinkable, as it would be by 10 o'clock, when he usually stepped on it in his night knocking sounds rounds, he took it back to the dispatch chair. The boy had either gone to sleep or was doing a hell of a good job faking it. On a whim, he grabbed the loose leaf binder that listed all of Dupre's businesses and called the Dupre Motel. The phone went unanswered. Hollister hadn't gone back to his rat trap of a motel after all, it seemed, which meant nothing, of course. Tim hung up, took the flash drive out of his pocket, and looked at it. It also meant nothing, more than likely, but as Tag Faraday had been at pains to point out, that was Sheriff Ashworth's call. They could wait. In the meantime, let the boy get his sleep. If he really had come all the way from Maine in a boxcar, he could use it. Chapter 15 of The End of the Institute. Hell is waiting. Stephen King. The Challenger carrying its 11 passengers, Mrs. Sigsbee, Tony Fazal, Winona Briggs, Dr. Evans, and the combined Ruby Red and Opal teams. Touchdown in Akalu at 5:15 for purposes of reporting back to Stackhouse at the Institute. This short dozen was now called Gold Team. Mrs. Sigsbee was first off the plane. Denny Williams from Ruby Red and Lewis Grant from Opal remained on board, taking care of Gold Team's rather specialized baggage. Mrs. Sigsbee stood on the tarmac in spite of the staggering heat and used her cell to call her office landline. Rosalind answered and handed her off to Stackhouse. Have you? She began, then paused to let the pilot and co-pilot pass, which they did without speaking. One was ex-Air Force, one ex-ANG, and both were like the Nazi guards in that old sitcom Hogan's Heroes. They saw nothing, they heard nothing. Their job was strictly pickup and delivery. Once they were gone, she asked Stackhouse if he had heard anything from their man in Dupre. Indeed I have. Ellis sustained a boo-boo when he jumped off the train. Did a header into a signal post. Instant death from a subdural hematoma. Would have solved most of our problems, but not this Hollister. Says it didn't even knock him out. A guy running a forklift saw Ellis, took him inside a warehouse near the station, called the local Sawbones. He came. A little later, a female deputy showed up. Deputy and forklift guy took our board to the sheriff's office. The ear that had the tracker in it was bandaged. Danny and Lewis Grant emerged from the plane, each one on end of a long steel chest. They muscled it down the air stairs and carried it inside. Mrs. Sigsbee sighed. Well, we might have expected it. We did, in fact. This is a small town we're talking about, right? With small town law enforcement? Middle of nowhere, Stackhouse agreed, which is good news. And there might be more. Our guy says the sheriff drives a big old silver Titan pickup, and it wasn't parked in front of the station or in the lot for town employees out back. So Hollister took a walk down to the local convenience store. See, he says the ragheads who work there, his term, not mine, know everything about everyone. The one on duty told him the sheriff stopped him for a bag of Swisher Sweets and said he was going to visit his mother, who's in a retirement home or hospice or something in the next town over. But the next town over is like 30 miles away. And this is good news for us, Hal? Mrs. Sigsbee fanned the top of her blouse against her neck. Can't be completely sure cops in a one-stop light down like Dupre will follow protocol, but if they do, they'll just hold the kid until the big dog gets back. Let him decide what to do next. How long will it take you to get there? 2 hours. We could do it in less, but we're carrying a lot of mother's helpers, and it would have be unwise to exceed the speed limit. Indeed, it would be unwise, Stackhouse said. Listen, Julia, the Dupre yokels could contact the Minneapolis cops at any time. May have contacted them already. It makes no difference either way. You understand that, right? Of course. We'll worry about any messes that need to be cleaned up later. For now, just deal with our wandering boy. Killing was what Stackhouse meant, and killing was what it would probably take. Ellis and anyone who tried to get in their way. That sort of mess would mean calling the zero phone. But if she could assure the gentle, lisping voice on the other end that the crucial problem had been solved, she thought she might escape with her life. possibly even her job, but she would settle for her life if it came to that. I know what needs to be done, Trevor. Let me get to it. She ended the call and went inside. The air conditioning in the little waiting room hit her sweaty skin like a slap. Denny Williams was standing by. Are we set? She asked. Yes, man. Ready to rock and roll. I'll take over when you give me the word. Mrs. Sigsbee had been busy with her iPad on the flight from Erie. We'll be making a brief stop at exit 181. That's where I'll turn command of the operation over to you. Are you good with that? Excellent with it. They found the others standing outside. There were no black SUVs with tinted windows, only three more mom vans in unobtrusive colors, blue, green, and gray. Orphan Annie would have been disappointed. Chapter 16 of The End of the Institute. Hell is Waiting. Stephen King. Exit 181 dumped the Gold Team caravan off the turnpike and into your basic Nowheresville. There was a gas station and a Waffle House, and that was the whole deal. The nearest town, Lada, was 12 miles away. 5 minutes past the Waffle House, Mrs. Sigsbee, riding up front in the lead van, directed Danny to pull in behind a restaurant that looked as if it had gone broke around the time Obama became president. Even the sign reading "Owner will build the suit" looked desolate. The steel case Denny and Louie had carried off the Challenger was opened, and Gold Team gunned up. The 7 members of Ruby Red and Opal took Glock 37s, the weapon they carried, on their extraction missions. Tony Fazzali was issued another, and Denny was glad to see him immediately rack the side and make sure the chamber was empty. A holster would be nice, Tony said. I don't really want to stuff it down my belt and back like some MS-13 gangbanger. For now, just stow it under the seat, Denny said. Mrs. Sigsbee and Winona Briggs were issued 6 sour P2 38s, petite enough to fit in their purses. When Denny offered one to Evans, the doctor held up his hands and took a step back. Tom Jones of Opal went to the portable armory and brought out one of two HK-37 all-assault rifles. How about this, Doc? 30-round clip. Blow a cow through the side of a barn. Got some flashbangs, too. Evans shook his head. I'm here under protest. If you mean to kill the boy, I'm not sure why I'm here at all. Fuck your protest, said Alice Green, also of Opal. This is greeted by the kind of laughter, brittle, eager, a little crazy, that only came before an op where there was apt to be shooting. That's enough, Mrs. Sigsbee said. Dr. Evans, it's possible that we can take the boy alive. Danny, you have a map of Dupree on your pad? Yes, ma'am. Then this operation is now yours. Very good. Gather round, people. You too, Doc. Don't be shy. They gathered around Denny Williams in the simmering late-day heat. Mrs. Sigsbee checked her watch. Quarter past 6, over 86 degrees, an hour from the destination, maybe a bit more. Slightly behind schedule, but acceptable, given the speed with which this had been put together. Here's downtown Dupre. What there is of it, Denny Williams said. Just one main street, halfway down. It is the county sheriff's department, right between the town office and the Dupre Mercantile Store. What's a mercantile store? This was Josh Gottfried of Opal. Like a department store, Robin Lex said. More like an old-time five and dime. That was Tony Fazal. I spent about 10 years in Alabama, most of it on MP duty. And I can tell you that these small southern towns, it's like what you want. Back 50 years in a time machine. Except for the Walmart, most of them have one of those. Stow the chatter, Mrs. Sigsbee said, and nodded for Denny to go on. Not much to it, Denny said. We park here, behind the town movie show, which is closed down. We get confirmation from Mrs. Sigsbee's source that the target is still in the police station. Michelle and I will play a married couple on a vacation taking us through little visited towns in the American South. Crazy, in other words, Tony said, which produced more of that brittle laughter. We will auto our way up the street, checking the surroundings, holding hands like the lovebirds we are, Michelle Robertson said, taking Denny's and giving him a cow, but worshipful smile. What about having your local man check things out? Louis Grant asked. Wouldn't that be safer? Don't know him, therefore don't trust his intel, Denny said. Also, he's a civilian. He looked to Mrs. Sigsbee, who nodded for him to go on. Maybe we'll go into the station and ask directions. Maybe not. We'll play that part by ear. What we want is an idea of how many officers are present and where they are. Then, he shrugged. We hit him. If there's a firefight, which I don't expect, we terminate the boy there. If not, we extract him. Less mess to clean up if it looks like an abduction. Mrs. Sigsbee left Denny to fill them in on where the Challenger would be waiting, and called Stackhouse for an update. Just hung up with our pal Hollister, he said. The sheriff pulled up in front of the station 5 or so minutes ago. By now he'll be getting introduced to our wayward boy. Time to get a move on. Yes, she felt not entirely unpleasurable tightening in her stomach and groin. I'll call you when it's over. Do the deed, Julia. Bail us out of this fucking mess. She ended the call. Now we are on chapter 17 of the end of the Institute. Hell is waiting. Stephen King. Sheriff John Ashworth got back to Dupre around 6:20, 1,400 miles north. Dazed children were dumping cigarettes and matches into baskets and filing into a screening room where the star of that evening's film would be a mega-church minister from Indiana with many powerful political friends. The sheriff stopped just inside the door and surveyed the big main room of the station with his hands on his well-padded hips, noting that his entire staff was there with the exception of Ronnie Gibson, who was vacationing at her mother's timeshare in St. Petersburg. Tim Jameson was there as well. Well, now, howdy do, he said. This can't be a surprise party because it's not my birthday, and who might that be? He pointed to the boy on the small reading room couch. Luke was curled into as much of a fetal position as it would allow. Ashworth turned to Tag Faraday, the deputy in charge. Also, just by the way, who beat him up? Instead of answering, Tag turned to Tim and swept out a hand in after you gesture. His name is Luke Ellis, and nobody here beat him up, Tim said. He jumped off the freight and ran into his signal post. That's where the bruises came from. As for the bandage, he says he was kidnapped and the kidnappers put a tracking device in his ear. He claims he cut off his earlobe to get rid of it. With a paring knife? Wendy asked. His parents are dead, Tag said. Murdered. That much of his story is true. I checked it out. Way to hell and gone in Minnesota. But he says the place he escaped from was in Maine, Bill Bicklow said. Ashworth was silent for a moment, hands still on his hips, looking from his deputies and his night knocker to the boy asleep on the couch. The conversation showed no sign of bringing Luke around. He was dead to the world. At last, Sheriff John looked back at his assembled law enforcement crew. I'm starting to wish I'd stayed to have dinner with my ma. Ah, was she poorly? Bill asked. Sheriff John ignored this. Assuming y'all haven't been smoking dope, could I get a coherent story here? Sit down, Tim said. I'll bring you up to speed, and then I think we might want to watch this. He put the flash drive down on the dispatch desk. After that, you can decide what comes next. Also, might want to call the police in Minneapolis or the state police in Charleston, Deputy Burkett said. Maybe both. He tilted his head toward Luke. Let them figure out what to do with him, Ashworth said. On second thought, I'm glad I came back early. This is kind of interesting. Wouldn't you say? Very, Wendy said. Well, that's all right. Not much interesting around here as a general rule. We can use the change. Do the Minneapolis cops think he killed his folks? That's the way the newspaper stories sound, Tag said. Although they're careful, him being a minor and all. He's awesomely bright, Wendy said, but otherwise he seems like a nice enough kid. Uh-huh, uh-huh. How nice or nasty he is will end up being someone else's concern, but for now, my curiosity's up. Bill, stop fiddling with that time clock before you bust it, and bring me a Coca-Cola from my office. Now we are on chapter 18 of the end of the Institute. Hell is waiting is the name of this end of the chapter, or this particular one anyway, by Stephen King. While Tim was telling Sheriff Ashworth the story Luke had told him and Wendy, and while Gold Team was approaching the I-95 Hardyville exit, where they would double back to the little town of Dupre, Nick Woolholm was herding the kids who had remained in the screening room into the little back half lounge. Sometimes kids lasted a surprisingly long time. George Isles was a case in point. Sometimes, however, they seemed to unravel all at once. It appeared to be happening to Ira Stanhope, what back half kids called the bounce. A brief post-movie respite from the headaches. Hadn't happened for her this time. Her eyes were blank, and her mouth hung open. She stood against the wall of the lounge with her head down and her hair in her eyes. Helen went to her and put an arm around her, but Iris didn't seem to notice. What are we doing here? Donna asked. I want to go back to my room. I want to go to sleep. I hate movie nights. She sounded querulous and on the verge of tears, but at least she was still present and accounted for. The same seemed true of Jimmy and Hal. They looked dazed, but not exactly hammered, the way Iris did. Not going to be any more movies, Avery said. Not ever. His voice was louder and cliche than it had ever been, and for her, that just about proved it. They really were stronger together. A bold prediction, Nicky said, especially coming from a little shit like you, Avister. Hal and Jimmy smiled at that, and Katie even giggled. Only Iris still seemed completely lost, now scratching self-consciously at her crotch. Len had been distracted by the television, although nothing was on. Felicia thought maybe he was studying his own reflection. "We don't have much time," Avery said. "One of them will come soon to take us back to our rooms." "Probably Corinne," Felicia said. "Yeah," Helen said. "The wicked bitch of the East. What do we do now?" George asked. For a moment Avery seemed at a loss, and Felicia was afraid. Then the little boy who had thought earlier in the day that his life was going to end in the immersion tank held out his hands. "Grab on," he said. "Make a circle." All of them except Iris shuffled forward. Helen Sims took Iris's shoulders and steered her into the rough circle the others had formed. Len looked longingly back over his shoulder at the TV, and then sighed and put out his hands. "Fuck it, whatever. That's right, fuck it," Felicia said. "Nothing to lose." She took Len's right hand in her left and Nikki's left hand in her right. Iris was the last one to join up, and the instant she was linked to Jimmy Cullum on one side and Helen on the other. Her head came up. "Where am I? What are we doing? Is the movie over?" "Hush," Gleacher said. "My head feels better." "Good. Hush now." And the others joined in. "Hush, hush, Iris, hush." Each hush was louder. Something was changing. Something was charging. Levers, Gleacher thought. "There are levers, Avery." He nodded at her from the other side of their circle. It wasn't power, at least not yet, and she knew it would be a fatal mistake to believe it was, but the potential for power was present. Felicia thought, "This is like breathing air just before the summer's biggest thunderstorm lets rip." "Guys," Len said in a timid voice, "my head's clear. I can't remember the last time it was clear like this." He looked at Kalisha with something like panic. "Don't let go of me, Sha." "You're okay," she thought at him. "You're safe." But he wasn't. None of them were. Kalisha knew what came next, what had to come next, and she dreaded it. Of course, she only wanted it. Only it was more than wanting, it was lusting. They were children with high explosives, and that might be wrong, but it felt so right. Avery spoke in a low, clear voice. Think with me, guys." He began, the thought and the image that went with it strong and clear. Nikki joined him. Katie, George, and Helen chimed in. So did Kalisha. Then the rest of them. They chanted at the end of the movies, and they chanted now. "Think of the sparkler, think of the sparkler, think of the sparkler." The dots came, brighter than they had ever been. The hum came, louder than it had ever been. The sparkler came, spitting brilliance. And suddenly, they weren't just 11. Suddenly, they were 28 years old. Ignition, Kalisha thought. She was terrified. She was exultant. She was holy. Oh my God. Chapter 19 of The End of the Institute. Hell is Waiting. Stephen King. When Tim finished telling Luke's story, Sheriff Ashworth sat silent for several seconds in the dispatch chair. His fingers laced together on his considerable belly, then he picked up the flash drive, started it, as if he had never seen such a thing before, and set it down. "He told you he doesn't know what's on it. Is that right? Just got it from the housekeeper along with a knife he used to do surgery on his own earlobe." "That's what he said," Tim agreed. "Went under a fence, went through the woods, took a boat down river just like Huck and Jim, and then rode a boxcar most of the way down the East Coast." "Well, that's quite a tale. I especially like the part about telepathy and mind over matter, like the stories the old grannies tell at their quilting bees and canning parties about rains of blood and stump water cures. Wendy, wake the boy up. Do it easy. I can see he's been through a lot no matter what his real story is, but when we do look at this thumb drive, I want him looking with us." Wendy crossed the room and shook Luke's shoulder, gently at first, then a little harder. He muttered, moaned, and tried to pull away from her. She took his arm. "Come on now, Luke, open your eyes," and he surged up so suddenly that Wendy stumbled backward. His eyes were open but unseeing, his hair sticking up in front and all around his head like quills. "They're doing something. I saw the sparkler." "What's he talking about?" George Burkett asked. "Luke," Tim said, "you're okay. You were having a trick." "Kill them!" Luke shouted, and in the station's small holding annex, the doors of all four cells clashed shut. "Obliterate those motherfuckers!" Papers flew up from the dispatch desk like a flock of startled birds. Tim felt a gust of wind buffet past him, real enough to ruffle his hair. When he gave a little cry, not quite a scream, Sheriff John was on his feet. Tim gave the boy a single hard shake. "Wake up, Luke, wake up!" The papers fluttering around the room fell to the floor. The assembled cops, Sheriff John included, were staring at Luke with their mouths open. Luke was pawing at the air. "Go away," he muttered. "Go away." "Luke, Tim said. Let go of Luke's shoulder. "Not you, the dots. The Sazi lot." He blew out a breath and ran a hand through his dirty hair. "Okay, they're gone." "You did that?" Wendy asked. She gestured at the fallen paperwork. You really did that? Something sure did it, Bill Wicko said. He was looking at the night knocker's time clock. The hands on this thing were going around, whizzing around, but now they stopped. They're doing something, Luke said. My friends are doing something. I felt it even way down here. How could that happen? Jesus, my head. Ashworth approached Luke and held out a hand. Tim noticed he kept the other on the butt of his holster gun. I'm Sheriff Ashworth, son. Want to give me a shake? Luke shook his hand. Good. Good start. Now I want the truth. Did you do that just now? I don't know if it was me or them, Luke said. I don't know how it could be them, but they're so far away. But I don't know how it could be me either. I never did anything like that in my life. You specialize in pizza pans, Wendy said. Empty ones. Luke smiled faintly. Yeah, you didn't see the lights, any of you. A bunch of colored dots. I didn't see anything but flying papers, Sheriff John said, and heard. Those cell doors slammed shut. Frank, George, pick that stuff up, would you? Wendy, get this boy an aspirin. Then we're going to see what's on that little computer widget. Luke said, this afternoon, all your brother could talk about was her barrettes. She said someone stole her barrettes. Sheriff John's mouth fell open. How do you know that? Luke shook his head. I don't know. I mean, I'm not even trying. Christ, I wish I knew what they were doing, and I wish I was with them. Tag said, I'm thinking there might be something to this kid's story after all. I want to look at that flash drive, and I want to look at it right now, Sheriff Ashworth said. And there's going to be 2 more parts left of this final book reading of the Institute. Hell is Waiting, Stephen King. Peace. See you soon.